Hello, welcome to a Live from America podcast. This is Hatem. Noam, unfortunately, I have an appointment today. Just check up. He's good, but he cannot make it. However, my good friend, comedian, and author and debater, Lou Perez, that joke is not funny anymore. Great book. You should get it. Hi, Lou.
Hi there. Thanks for having me. I'm not much of a debater, but we'll see. Maybe I'll get good today. Maybe I can learn some
Well, I
moves.
mean, you host The Wrong Take, which is a great debate show, coming to a theater near you soon.
Thank you. Yeah, the wrong take with Lou Perez, which is often the case.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's actually a perfect name. And special guest, always love to have him. He is one of the people that give you a great insight and actually knows what he's talking about. Natan Sachs is here. He is a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute. He focuses on the U.S. foreign policy, Israel affair, and Middle East geopolitical stuff. And he is
And
here. Hello.
I specialize in sounding like I know what I'm talking about. That's the real
No,
skill.
you actually, it's kind of like when COVID happened, you have all these experts before and after, and then you realize that then nobody knows anything, you know? And not
Well,
only that,
I
people,
feel the
yeah, and people don't apologize when they're wrong, and they still, they take one side and with no backup. Same thing with whenever there is a problem with the Middle East, or in general, but the Middle East specifically, people take sides. And I understand if you're reacting in a human nature to something, but don't take sides like you know history and you don't. And you're one of the people that's very fair.
thank you. I appreciate it.
It's
I'll
always
try,
great to
but
have you.
but but I'm sure Lou will be able to bring out something.
Well, Lou's kind of like the opposite of you. No, I'm just joking. Um, so we'll talk today about a lot of stuff, the Gaza deal, Mamdani, and I want to dive in more into the political scene in Israel after this the deal, and we'll talk about us. But let's start with Mamdani first. So, given that he just got elected, do you see his victory as like a signal that or a sign that can transfer abroad over our borders? Is that a sign for Israel? And if so, what it could be and what it means for people in Israel and for the Jews in New York?
It's a tough one, obviously. First of all, I'm not a New Yorker. So, and of course I followed it like many people, but I'm sure I didn't follow it as closely as many New Yorkers. Let me just say first empirically, I'm Jewish and I have many relatives and friends in New York, and there are many Jewish New Yorkers who are genuinely very scared. And so first of all, I need to defer to them somewhat, okay? Because again, I'm not New Yorker and I'm not following it as closely enough, and they are genuinely scared. It's not that they're scared that City Hall is about to round up the Jews, but that some of the things he said, I think stands out. His pronouncement on October 8th, which to many people I know read like a all lives matter kind of pronouncement after October 7th. Um, really deeply troubling about what he believes and but especially what he focuses on. Um, but I'm not a voter. It doesn't matter. New York elects whoever they want as a mayor. They don't ask me. I think as a signal, I think it's a very important question that you said. Look, the mayor of New York doesn't make foreign policy by and large, and in and of itself, it's not going to affect, I think, too much. Although it's a giant in terms of Jewish population, it's a giant city too. Um, but I think it is a for Israelis, it should be a very stern wake-up call, which is to say that even in a city with such a huge Jewish population and a city that historically has been very attuned to the concerns of the Jewish population, someone could win either despite or maybe even a bit because of his very, very strident positions on Israel. That is a sign of how deeply positions of Israel and the brand Israel has changed in the last 2 years, and in the last year even more so. So, um, just from an Israeli perspective, I think it should be a giant wake-up call. I don't know exactly. I think we're all rushing a little to decide what it means exactly for the Democratic Party or the future of this. I don't think we know necessarily. Hopefully, the ceasefire sticks, and hopefully, some of the images at least calm down, and so maybe some things will calm down. But this is clearly a symptom of a very deep change that's happened, certainly in the Democratic Party, but not only there. New York is not, it's mostly Democratic, but it's not purely so. And the fact that some of the things he said not only did not disqualify him, but maybe helped him is a huge shift in American politics. And I'll add that some of these shifts are not only on the left in America, they're also on the right. They're in very different ways, but there are real shifts in the Republican Party too about Israel. And again, a sign of the just as a branding perspective, the brand Israel in a very, very different position than it was 2 years ago. So from a purely instrumental perspective, I think for Israelis, it should be a huge wake-up call. Very troubling, again, just in terms of Jews I know who are very concerned in New York. I hope their concern is misplaced.
Yeah.
As a non-New Yorker, I can blissfully not take a position.
I have a couple of more, follow-up question, and then I'll go to Lou about your thoughts, Lou, about Mamdani in general, not just, for the Jewish and Israeli in New York. But my follow-up question is, one third, the polls showed that third of, Jewish population voted for him. And I know a lot of very, especially on the young side, activist Jews that were for him, like,
Big
campaigning
time.
for him a lot. So that's one. Two, it's finally, you get to know how we feel as Muslims when everybody
Yeah,
comes out and run into, as they run, they say Muslims are this, Muslim is that, and we scared all the time. So now it's interesting when it's, when the fear, change how people see it different. I'm not saying you, but I'm saying in
of
general.
course.
But
Look,
one of the
sorry.
yeah, one of the major things that I wanted to follow up with is like one of the headlines at Haaretz today in the Daily, which says Israel right wing bet the country's future in U.S. Christian nationalists, and it backfired. And that made me think of the election as a sign.
Yeah, look, I think so. First, I just say from a personal perspective, the fact that it's the first Muslim mayor of New York, I think is fantastic,
Yeah,
and I think there's a very large Muslim population, and I'm not only happy for them, I'm happy with them. I think it's a great thing. Um, and there are many Jews who voted for Mamdani, and again, they're New Yorkers and they can judge for themselves. I'll just say that Jews are not just like Muslims. They're not only Jews or only Muslims. They're many
yeah,
different things. And so you have many Jews who might be progressive and or might be extremely critical of Israel themselves. I'm just saying there are a whole bunch. If you think of Jews are predominantly Democratic, especially in New York. Not only there's
yeah,
a sizable Republican sign, especially Orthodox Jews, but among non-Orthodox Jews, it's predominantly Democratic, or at least was until recently. And of course, Cuomo is not a Republican, but the fact that two-thirds did not vote for Mamdani also says something. It is what it is. The elections are over, and I never had a vote anyway. So
yeah,
it's a reality when I have to think about it. And I wish him success. I mean, I hope he
yeah,
in good things, right? I hope he succeeds in doing good things, and I hope these fears are misplaced. Again, he's not Secretary of State. He's not president.
yeah,
He's mayor of a city.
yeah,
I'll just say that mayor of a city and someone who's active on domestic affairs part of the reason that it triggers so many people is that here is the one single cause in the world that he finds to be so central to his political
yeah,
life. And there are a few other things happening in the world. Not that this isn't extremely important or that one kind of identify with everything one can, but nothing else happening has triggered this kind of response for him or many other people. And that's part of why I think it scares a
yeah.
bunch.
The polls showed that, it's split between more like was because of the Gaza issue, the voters,
Mhm.
and also the the economic thing. But I personally look at the I'm glad that there's a Muslim mayor and all that. I don't like his policies in general. I didn't like the speech. I think the speech was fiery but not unifying. I always look at leaders the second they win, if it becomes unifying or not. Same thing that happened with Trump is like your job is like, okay, you won, you got it. Let's unify the city. And like, so
Yeah.
I disagree with a lot of things, but I'm happy there's the energy, and let's hope there's something happen.
Yeah.
Lou, what's your thoughts on Mamdani in general? And also for
Lou
you,
loves him.
uh, do you think that um anti like Islamophobia and all the bad ads that they were like, look at Mamdani 9/11, that actually backfired in a way?
I would that's exactly what I was going to say. For one, I think I was surprised. I'm over in New Jersey, but I'm a new, I grew up in New York, and I'm back in the city often. But I was really surprised at how central of a feature of the campaign and the criticism was about Israel. And I think it does make sense comparing New York to say the other cities. I mean, I'm doubtful if we look at the mayoral campaign in Cincinnati that they're going to be so concerned about where where they stand on Israel. And obviously New York is really special in that regard, not only because it's the attacks of in what was it 1993 and 94, the first attack on the Trade Center, and then 2001. But I felt like making it a central the central criticism against Mamdani was a really big mistake, in part because I don't see him and as an Islamist. I don't see him as especially not a jihadist. I mean, if you look at it, he's a secular Muslim who grew up in New York, was a rapper. His mom is an artist. His dad is a professor. He's a New York kid, really. And a lot of his other politics, I mean, him being a leftist, him being a avowed, democratic socialist, coming out, there's quite a few, videos of him being straight up communist. I mean, wanting to, seize property, et cetera. And they were trying to paint him as like as if he had on like a bomb vest under that he was looking to detonate at any point. And rather than taking him on and saying like, no, he has pretty standard views for a leftist, in New York, very much anti-Zionist and also wanting to do all this other stuff. So yeah, I agree with you, Hatem. I think it backfired big time.
Yeah, and he does he took a lot of the playbook of Trump, to be honest, being energetic, being different, having a big thing that I don't know if you can do, like free buses, free, freeze the rent, all stuff. It's kind of like the build a wall, Mexico's going to pay for it kind of thing,
Well, there's a lot of stuff that he wants to do domestically, like in New York, like the free buses and stuff like that, which he's going to come up against a lot of roadblocks. There's some stuff he wants to do where, as a mayor, he's not in charge of that.
Yeah.
He has to talk. When you're talking about free buses, you got to talk to the MTA about that.
Yeah,
you got to get that through. When you're talking about freezing rent, you got to talk about the board that's in charge of of deciding that. So it might sound good to a lot of people, but there's a reality check that I think is.
But that's exactly my point. Is like, if you're in a debate, don't talk about or doing commercials. I was like, don't say like, oh, he's Muslim, he's gonna laugh if there's 9/11. Challenge him in these points. Say like, tell me how you're gonna do this.
Right.
Stuff like that. However, Mayor of New York is kind of like it's almost a country on its own. It gets a lot of media, gets a lot. So but that's that could be a sign for a lot of things, But I don't know if that's a good sign or a bad sign. We'll see. But yeah, I'm excited to have someone. I actually like that Bernie and AOC was backing him up. Because finally we got somebody from them in. Let's see what you're gonna do, because you just been talking for years, and I want to see like if you're actually gonna make it happen. Because a lot of times it almost like people like it's good when you're on the other side. I can go to lose room. It's like, oh, if you do this or you do this, yeah, but start the whole thing.
Well, one thing I just wanted to point out, I have never, in all the years I've known Hatem, I have never seen him eat with his fingers. So I just want to put that out there. I don't know how authentic Hatem is. Because Mamdani eats with his fingers sometimes.
That's another thing.
But he's of Indian heritage.
Yeah,
right.
Ugandan.
Yeah, Indian Ugandan. Yeah.
Yeah, but here's another thing about this, and this is why this has pissed me off when they did ads with him eating with his hands. And I always tell the story. I went to Bali, no, not Bali, somewhere in Indonesia. That was like and there was a secret temple, and to get in, they had two things that the villagers. You have to wear a skirt and you have to cover your feet. That's just the rules, All the tourists did it, no questions asked, and they're happy to do it because that's what they do, So if you go to a place where that's what they do, they eat with their hands. By the way, in the first Gulf War, a lot of Schwarzkopf and all of this did that, by the way.
I have a confession. I used to live in Indonesia, and there was more than one occasion where I would eat with my hands because
Yeah.
that's the tradition
That's
there.
that's a rule. Yeah. Like in Japan, like when they give you the chopstick, this is just the culture. So when you
Yeah.
make fun of a culture, he's actually somebody who's willing to get in and do the culture,
You
which is
know,
I think
I think also the job he's getting is a super hard one, right? And first of all, all the things that Lou mentioned, a lot of the power is dispersed. It's not really centralized with the mayor. It's dispersed with a lot of different veto players inside the city. Then there's also the governor's
Right,
purview. I
right.
mean, there's a lot of things that are at the state level. They're not at the city level. If he's smart, and he is very smart, clearly, but if he's successful, I think one way might be where he promised a million things. He picks one high visibility thing of them, spends his political capital on that, a meaningful thing for his agenda, and one that's very bread and butter economic focused,
yeah,
and gets that one thing passed. If he tries to do all the things he promised, he's not going to succeed.
yeah,
And then he'll be blamed. If he
yeah,
gets one major thing passed, he can point to it. He can say, look, I can actually get things done.
yeah.
Democratic socialism can work, at least in some purview, despite all the things that people pushed against.
And
And I don't know that it's impossible. I don't know enough about New York politics, but I think that might be possible. But it's not an easy thing to do, especially when you come in with such a wave of enthusiasm, right? So people expect, some people, younger supporters will expect him to just change the city, make it into a Scandinavian haven of social democracy. And he can't do that. No mayor
yeah.
can do that. So I don't know. We'll see.
No, 100%. And I think it's gonna backfire if he doesn't. I like your idea of like getting one thing and do it and make a difference when he's there. But I always kind of same thing I said when anybody wins any election, because this is election. We cannot be bad losers. Somebody win, we all
Yeah,
support. But the way I
absolutely.
see it is like your first speech, your victory speech. Are you unifying people? Are you bringing people together? If you want to get your agenda, you're going to need your enemies to work with you. You don't want people to root for your failure, which they do. You have to bring the cops out. You have to have a very clear position in the police. New York is NYPD is big part
Yeah.
of New York culture. You have to be like, all right, there's mistakes in everything, but you defund the police, all that bullshit. Like this is crazy. Um, However, I tell you one thing, and this is the last thing about this, and then we'll move on, is if Como's uh uh his speech when he conceded, if he
I
talked
did
like
see
this, the whole campaign he would have won, you know. But he was the only time, same thing with Hillary, the only time he was, and even when they were booing Mamdani, he's like, no, 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 we're not gonna do that. You know, you could have said that long time ago and made it like be like if they every time they attack him as Muslim, Como is like, no, you shouldn't focus on his policies. He would have won, but
Yeah,
you know,
Cuomo was very much absent. I mean, I saw, maybe it might just be the feed that I have,
yeah,
online, but that guy was like, I have no idea where he was. You
yeah.
have Mamdani like basically running a marathon every day, going to every single place you can go. I mean, to start off your day, campaigning and say like Queens, and then it's 2 a.m. and you're at a gay club, you know, uh, you could see him with every
You
single
talking
type of
about
New
him or
Yorker.
me? How did you know?
Well, I didn't want to. I don't, we don't know which club, so you're very exclusive, the ones that allow you in.
It's kind of thing with Hillary Clinton when she didn't campaign and Trump was campaigning all over.
Right,
All right,
right.
so let's get moving to some Israeli policies and Gaza and all that. Natan, how fragile is the peace? It seems like the peace plan. It seems like everybody's trying to be like, oh, it's not fragile, but everything is happening. Israel still, uh, attacking, some Hamas soldiers or terrorists attacking, and they say, "Oh no, 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 it's holding, it's not." But how fragile is it? Is this has become the new reality for the Middle East? They were like everybody's like, yeah, it is a ceasefire, we good, but you still can attack whatever you want. Is that the new reality now?
I don't think it's the attack whenever you want. I think this is a weird ceasefire in the sense that it is very much a reflection of Trump. So Trump decided he wanted a ceasefire in very much in collaboration with regional actors, so Arab states, Muslim states, not only in the region, and um, with a lot of pressure on the Israelis and on Hamas, especially the Qataris and the Turks, and to a degree the Egyptians who have sway over Hamas, they sort of willed it into being. And so it's there. So, when they came out with the 20-point plan, the response from Hamas and from Israel was this very disingenuous yes. So Israel said yes, of course, but Israel didn't believe and still doesn't believe that Hamas will really disarm. And Hamas said yes, and explicitly, didn't mention anything about disarming, but also it didn't. In its response, or this public response, it very clearly contradicted the idea that Hamas would have no direct or indirect influence on governance in the day after in Gaza. And so today we have a reality that Hamas is not disarmed. Not only is it not disarmed, it's deployed thousands of its own people and in some cases killed opposition, any kind of armed opposition it could find. And so it's taken over control again, which contradicts certainly the plan, the Trump plan, but also the Israeli big goal of eliminating Hamas as a governing structure. It has followed through so far, including today, on releasing the hostages and apparently on trying to find the bodies. It dragged its feet there a lot, but it seems to be going forward. So, sorry, to answer your question, we have this ceasefire that is there, and everyone's saying it's there because Trump has decided it's there.
Yeah.
And it's real, right? We shouldn't, I can tell you a million reasons why it's short of everything that's promised and a million problems, and it's all true. But we are in a very different and much better place than we were before the ceasefire. And that's really the first thing we should say. So this is disingenuous. I have a million problems with the plan, but I wish Trump Godspeed on this, right? I'm not
Yeah.
a fan, but I wish him Godspeed on this. Mostly via his will, they have brought us a ceasefire of sorts, and it is sort of holding of sorts, and I'll take that compared to where we were before any day. Um, Moving forward is going to be very hard, but the Americans are seriously engaged. There's an American military and civilian presence in southern Israel to coordinate all their operations there. They're putting together this international force to deploy. The big question remains, can they get Hamas to either disarm or decommission in some form or another? Will that allow a civilian actor to govern the strip on the civilian side? And then can the Trump administration stay on the Israeli case enough to make sure that the Israelis do their part? So far, they seem very engaged and very serious. So there's room for extremely cautious hope if we lower our expectations.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. If we lower the expectation, if the expectation is not, what we've seen in
Yeah.
Gaza and all that. But it reminds me a lot of what I read at the time between the 60s and between 67 exactly and 73, Israel, Egypt, the no peace, no war kind of
Yeah, there
situation.
was, in fact, a war of attrition. It was called the War of Attrition for quite a
Yeah,
while.
yeah.
Yeah.
That came towards later,
Yeah.
but there was there were, so that's the thing is like we're not in war, but we're not in peace, but which one is it? We're not sure. So it seems like it's that, and I feel like this could fall apart anytime because I always said to move on, uh Hamas need to be out of the picture, and they need to be prosecuted for what they did, and so is the Israeli who made any decisions that a war crime, and that's how you move on is like when people held accountable for things, and then obviously Hamas need to be out, a new governing body from civilians that actually genuinely, but this it seems like we're back to the point where politics play a role where Israel's like, you know what, this is good for us. Leave them like that, leave in that part. And Hamas is like, I'm happy with this.
I don't think the Israelis are happy with Hamas still being there. I do think though. So I think there's two different things, right? So if we wanted reconciliation, then lots of things would need to happen. I think for there to be a better day in Gaza and less of a chance of another attack on Israel or an Israel-Gaza war resuming, um, much less of the 20-point plan needs to happen, but it would require a different governing body there. And to me, that still remains the huge stumbling block, which is
Yeah.
I have yet to be convinced that Hamas is about to give up its
Yeah,
weapons or
but
its
my point is like for Israel, and then I'll talk with Lou, is like my point is, that if Hamas is out and they like, okay, and there's the next logical progression is like, let's talk about the two states, let's talk about Palestine. And
yeah.
Israel is not ready for that. So that's
No, it's
why
not.
it's good to keep it like that politically.
Oh, for the Israelis, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
There's some benefit, but that used to be the calculation, certainly for Netanyahu, to keep the West Bank and the Gaza Strip separate, because then no one, yeah. And that's true. But on the other hand, the domestic political damage for Netanyahu of Hamas still being there is very considerable, because this really was, for Israelis after October 7th, a huge goal. There were sort of two goals: removing Hamas and freeing the hostages. And so the fact that Hamas is still there, especially for Netanyahu, who for so long explicitly prioritized removing Hamas over releasing the hostages. So he could have had to deal with Hamas maybe earlier to do it, but he prioritized, no, Hamas has to not govern. And to see them still governing for him is also a domestic political headache. So I see your logic, and there's something there, but I think for the Israelis today, especially after everything that has happened, that remains the key question. And then it would remain on the Americans to make sure that the Israelis stick up, complete their side of the deal, even short of moving towards a two-state solution, which is part of the 20-point plan.
Lou, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, a question I was going to ask is, a part of, the ceasefire and, hopefully for lasting peace has there been a call to say that, okay, Hamas needs to allow elections to happen in Gaza? Because I remember early on, one of the criticisms I would often hear is when people would say, most of the average age in Gaza was so young that when Hamas took over, the kids were babies or not even born, so they didn't have an opportunity to choose, their leadership. Those same people I often, seem to be pretty silent for what I think is like a basic call for, okay, you need to have elections. You need to be able to move this process forward where people are, actually taking part. Obviously, that's really tough when you have opposition, leaders and stuff being shot in the street and executed without trial. But I'm just wondering, what role, if anything, is the idea of, okay, let's get some democratic rule in there.
Well, I'll
So
let the expert answer, but I'm just going to add one more thing
Yeah.
to that is, you know, Hamas, as long as they're there, gonna be no election because, and I always use that example when Israeli hostages coming out and you see them happy and smiling and hugging Hamas, they're doing it out of fear. It's the exact same thing with the Palestinians people there. They cannot do shit because they will be killed and murdered and stuff. So it's not that they want Hamas, it's not that they want,
right.
but go ahead, Nathan.
So for many years, the question of elections was very, very central to the attempts to reunify the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. But it was sometimes Hamas that was demanding it because they thought they might win. But elections in this constellation would not be in the Gaza Strip alone. It would always be in Israel, sorry, in Gaza Strip, in the West Bank, and in East Jerusalem, which the Israelis consider to be part of Israel. And so the last elections that took place did include voting in East Jerusalem. Israel allowed it with American pressure, the first W administration. But that's not something the current Israeli government would allow. And it's something also that the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah is very scared of, because what if Hamas wins, as they did sort of last time? So that was always part of the constellation, and it wasn't simply Hamas refusing. It was often fear from Ramallah that Hamas might win again, or at least win in some places, and the big question of East Jerusalem, which maybe could get around with digital means these days, but it was always a big question as well. Today, that's not part of the plan. The Americans are not pushing for elections. It's not something that the Trump administration isn't pushing anywhere. But they are very explicitly, it needs to be someone else governing, and in fact, barely Palestinians. So in the way they conceived of it originally, there would be like a Palestinian on the board, but it's essentially an international board chaired by Trump himself and with Tony Blair in a major role. It later evolved somewhat, and maybe they're talking about something that now would have a bit more of a Palestinian component and maybe slightly less of a Tony Blair component, still Trump nominally in charge. We'd have to wait and see, but the question, I'll just add that there is a middle ground, right, which is in some ways very troubling, and that's the Hezbollah model. So if you think of Hezbollah, for many years in Lebanon, at least until this war, was by far the strongest power in Lebanon, but it didn't have, and it participated in politics, right? It ran candidates, but it wasn't in charge of things, right? It didn't lead the government. The Lebanese system, the president is always a Maronite Christian, prime minister is always a Sunni Muslim. So, and the Speaker of Parliament was a Shia, but not a Hezbollah one, an ally. And so they would always pull the strings and be the real power that everyone feared, but they were not, they didn't take the blame for civilian affairs. And there's a danger that the Palestinian Authority was always afraid of. If they come back to the Gaza Strip and take over civilian affairs, as many people demanded of them, but Hamas remains armed, then Hamas sits back. It's not in charge of all the civilian failures, but it is the only power that counts, and it can threaten whoever it wants, just like Hatem said. And that reality is still there. You could have a civilian body, international or Palestinian or a mix, but if Hamas still has the arms, they can still intimidate whoever they want. It might still be better than no reconstruction, right? If they can start building and they can start alleviating some of the things there, that might still be better than where we are right now. But it's very, very far from any image of transformed Gaza Strip, and it has many of the ingredients of renewed Israeli-Hamas conflict in the future because there's no there wasn't much middle ground before October 7th, but there's none today between the two.
I I think there's also a major thing is we have to learn from the past, from history. It cannot be new Iraq. It cannot be like, okay, like the Tony Blair was a failure idea. I don't know why they even suggested as a name, obviously, or as somebody who's gonna lead a state, supposedly, without not being from there, but so we cannot try to do what we did in Iraq and oh, let's wait until they build a coalition, and then there will be election and stuff, because they always gonna see that person as a symbol of resistance. We have to resist that person. So now it's gonna create a new war. It has to be somebody that's there. And the other thing, which is also a major, thing, and I don't hear a lot of people talking about it, is like there must be a major change in the Palestinian politics, having a new leader, Hamas is out, or all that. But there must be a huge change in Israel as well, politics. And like I said, what happened, like I'm hoping. See, I mean, we're gonna talk about the leak videos and all that later, but I am hoping, like, I yet to hear, okay, what happened? There got to be a major change. A, there's a failure on October 7th. B, there's failure in policies before October 7th, years that led to October 7th, or the arming Hamas and allow them to get money, separate and conquer, all that. So there have to be a major change within the Israeli politics as well, and Hamas should not be part of anything in the future. But I feel like people, this is what I say, like they say something, but it's not actual. They say, oh, no, Hamas is not involved, and then you see they policing Gaza, and Trump says, yeah, we allow them to be police. What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and look, in Israel, there's a chance of a real change. It's not the change that I think many people abroad are hoping for, but because even if Netanyahu loses the next election, so elections are scheduled within a year. They need to be by the end of October. They might be sooner, but they're supposed to be by the end of October, October 26th. And if Netanyahu loses, which he may not, but if he loses, the change will not be the change that a lot of people abroad are hoping for. It's not a completely radically different view. It may be a return, for example, of Naftali Bennett, who was prime minister for a while. Now, he's not more lefty than Bibi. In some ways, he's more right wing than Bibi, but he is very different than him, and he's in some ways much more pragmatic, and he was not responsible for the failures.
Yeah.
So I think there would be a real opportunity for change there. But again, we need to be clear-eyed on the limits. It's
Yeah.
not that Israel is going to be transformed to something completely different, and that it's not.
Yeah, I
The
don't think they
Israelis have a
should. I mean, there is no way after an attack, you can't be like, after 9/11 say, oh, we're gonna do that. It's just not realistic. But it needs
right.
to have the
There has
different
to be a
actors.
change.
People, there's
I
no
completely agree.
more wanna deal with Netanyahu in any capacity, even in a situation that he might be right about. They're just
Yeah.
not going to. You know,
And Israeli society is so deeply polarized on him too. I think a change there is crucial, and
yeah,
it's not impossible. He
yeah.
is behind in the polls. He's not behind enough that we would say it's a shoo-in, and also he may be behind, but in a way that would essentially create a draw, like they had for like 4 years. Sorry, for 4 elections, several years before October 7th, and so you could have Netanyahu continuing as a caretaker prime minister, which could last a long time. But there is a real chance also of an actual change. Bennett has many advantages over Netanyahu, although I'll admit he's not my cup of tea in many different ways. But he is, but he is very different from Netanyahu. It's a
Yeah.
different
I
personality.
do think that we need a new face, a new name for both
Yeah.
sides, one that can, even, if the Saudi want to be involved now, they can talk to Saudi. They don't want to talk to Netanyahu. Qatar is not going to talk to Netanyahu. Kuwait, Egypt, so you need somebody in both sides, but I never hear the argument of like we need somebody in the other sides.
Oh,
Always,
for sure.
yeah, always Hamas and stuff like that. All right, let's talk a little bit about inside Israel now. Post, the release of the hostages, about the mood, about all this. What's your thoughts on uh, the draft dodgers? If people don't know, there's a lot of people that, not a lot of people, but there's a few people in Israel that did not want to participate in the draft, which is mandatory, I believe, during the war. So now now that the war is settling down, they're getting into, the draft dodgers, try to get them, and there's a unity of, even like some Orthodox Jews, which usually, not involved in this, but they against the arrest of the draft dodgers. So let's start with that, and then we'll talk about the leak video. But Lou, what's your thoughts on that in general? If about draft dodgers doing and stuff like that.
Oh, I mean,
There's a
this is
moral,
definitely.
obviously, obligation. Yeah, I don't think people were afraid to do it. I think most of the people just didn't agree with it.
Well, I obviously have to, step back and say I'm not very, familiar with what's happening and how things are run that way, in
So,
Israel. I mean, one thing that I heard from friends uh, talk about is just how like this has been a very long war, and I guess the way that at least I understand it, please correct me if I'm wrong, like Israel doesn't have like a traditional kind of standing army where instead you have like sort of like rotations, like people go out to the front, then they're back home and et cetera. And I'm sure that's definitely taking the toll on the morale of Israelis. And I remember, I think it was one of Noam's episodes. He had I think a special forces Israeli soldier on who taught, and one of the things that they brought up was like, the amount of fratricide that happens. Like, it's something like 20% of all deaths in the Israeli military are due to them shooting themselves in combat, and I mean that seems really high, and I'm sure that doesn't do well for morale. So I think I could imagine people this war is dragging on. There's either they're being sent to the front and coming back, or seeing their friends and family, and just wanting this to be over, And I don't know how long you can keep fighting a war like that. I mean, even when with our war on terror, I mean uh, one of the criticisms for that is that you had a lot of National Guardsmen who were basically just deployed doing so many deployments, and that obviously took a heavy toll not only on the bank and the cost, but also on the mental capacity of our own soldiers. So.
so let
So,
me, yeah, let me rephrase the question then to Nathan. Can you tell us about, the draft system or like army system
yeah.
in Israel, and then your thoughts? I don't know how much a percentage of what Lou is describing about people afraid of stuff. I think it's more, so you can tell us, is it more like that or more like people just disagree with the war itself?
So yeah, stop me when it gets too lectury. So it's slightly different in Israel. There's sort of two components here. One is how people are enlisted into the military, and the other is sort of the doctrine of how Israel fights wars and the length of wars. So Israel from the very beginning, especially early on, was a very small state with a very small territory and very, very convoluted territories. Before 67, before it took the West Bank and Gaza Strip, the borders were extremely long for a very small place. So it's the size of New Jersey, but the borders were very, very squiggly and very vulnerable, especially in two places, cutting Jerusalem off and cutting between Haifa and Tel Aviv.
And
And
also
so,
neighbors, different countries,
I'm sorry,
neighboring,
and neighbors, many
neighboring
different
different countries.
countries,
Yeah.
but they were united in opposition to Israel. So
Yeah.
Israel was always afraid of a multi-front war that could cut it up in different. So because of that thinking, small country, very little, very small economy then, and very vulnerable with little territory. Their approach from the beginning was very explicitly, wars have to be very fast because with a small population, you can't have a big standing army. They have a standing army, but it's much smaller than
Oh,
the militaries that's needed. And therefore, most of it is reservists, people who have served in the standing army and then for 20 years after that are called once in a while for training and then to be deployed if there's a war. And so the doctrine was the standing army has to withstand a surprise attack like in 73, and then the reserves come in much bigger numbers and push the enemy back. And that's one. Two, they have to be very fast, like 67, right? Six-Day War. It has to be because Israel can't sustain long wars. Even 73 was just a few weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And because the economy couldn't sustain a very long war, and because the reservists, they have businesses and families and everything back home. They can't spend all the time in war, and they're a big chunk of the population. And because the territory is so small, and Israel could be cut in half, really, in two different places, they wanted it had to be very aggressive. They had to take the fight to the enemy territory very fast. So this was always the doctrine. This war was the longest in Israel's history, longer even than the war of attrition between Israel and Egypt, and multiple times longer than 73, even longer than the war of 48, 47 to 49, which was sort of the Israeli War of Independence or the Nakba for Palestinians. Even that was shorter. And the toll was enormous, as you describe on reservists, tour after tour. And these are people who are like National Guard. They have families, they have businesses that have collapsed, marriages being, destroyed. This it can sound trivial, but when it's a big part of the population and a big part of the productive part of the population, it's a huge toll on society. Now, it's just not a draft. It's about conscription. It's not a draft in the sense that there's no lottery involved. People are just conscripted at 18, men and women. But there's two big populations that are exempted. One is not all, but most of the Arab-speaking population of Israel, so Palestinian citizens of Israel, Muslims and Christian. The Druze population does enlist and rises to very high ranks, including generals. And some of the Muslims, especially Bedouins in the south, do sometimes enlist, but they volunteer. And then ultra-Orthodox, so Hasidic and Litvak. So New York, you have a big population. It's not just Hasidics, actually. They're about half of that. But it's generally the people who would wear black with the black kippah or yarmulke. So there's also a large modern Orthodox population, which is distinct from
And why
that
are they exempt?
for political reasons. So originally they were a very small community, and they were originally they were sort of anti-Zionist against the state, really, and they sort of had a deal with the state of saying we will cooperate, but let us preserve an element of our way of life, which was mostly destroyed in the Holocaust. And at the time, the original Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion said, okay, 400 kids a year are not going to enlist because if they enlist, they'd lose their way of life, which is a very closed society way of life. 400 kids can stay out. Over time, because of their political power, they tend to be neither left nor right. In the past, now they're very right wing, but they tended to be between left and right. So they could use that leverage, and they got that 400 number to be opened up, and now it's tens of thousands. So you have now a significant chunk of the population, of the Jewish population, that is not serving in a time of war in all times, but including in a time of war, when the modern Orthodox do serve a lot. And of course, in time of war, many people are dying also, or losing limbs, or just PTSD in enormous numbers. And so the anger over that has always been big in the secular population. Now it's huge because it's so clear and so apparent, and because the military literally needs the numbers. In the past, sometimes the military would say, we don't really need those numbers. But now it's clear they do. Reservists are serving again and again and again. So that's kind of the story. There are some draft dodgers, but it's more, but that's not huge numbers. More what you would see is people who are reservists who are called up but said, I can't make it now. And then you never know exactly what the reason is. That's not the giant numbers. The giant numbers is the ultra-Orthodox population, and that's an explosive political issue. And it's an issue that also unites people on the left, tend to be more secular Jewish, but also on the right wing, modern Orthodox tend to be very right wing. They're the backbone of the settler community, for example, but they do serve, and many of them are very angry at the ultra Orthodox, another component of the right wing. So you have a real wedge there in the right wing, and that's one that kind of the center and the left are hoping to capitalize on in the elections. End of lecture.
Can I have I have a question just about elections.
Sure.
So, I understand like birthright and that sort of thing. Say you are, say, a Jewish kid in New York, and you just voted for Mamdani, right?
Yeah.
If you go and get your dual citizenship with Israel, how long before, like, can you vote? How soon can you vote? Do you have to live in Israel for a certain amount of time? Because it would be kind of wild if sort of like every, Jewish kid who voted for Mamdani registered to vote in Israel and basically said, bye bye, Netanyahu.
Yeah, but don't forget, you could also have the ultra Orthodox community of New York showing up in Israel and voting for Netanyahu's camp, and you can have LA. There's a lot of different uh, possibilities there. So the law, essentially, a Jewish person or a family member of a Jewish person could get citizenship very fast, but they would need to move to Israel. They need to move to Israel and become an Israeli there. And on election day, they have to be there. You can't vote from abroad. And no Israeli can vote from abroad. There's no such thing. So on election day, first they'd have to be a citizen, that they need to move there. Of course, they can move there and then move back, but they'd have to move there. And secondly, they'd have to physically be there. So yeah, in theory, it could happen, and there've sometimes been arguments: should you let people vote abroad? But it's usually, but that's basically the issue. So you could, I don't think you'd see that. You would again, you could see Mamdani voters, but you could also see the opposite, right?
Yeah. Do you do you think if Trump endorsed Netanyahu, I'm pretty sure Trump is kind of popular now there with the hostages, you know. Um, but if he endorsed Netanyahu, then maybe have the separate effect than it would have here, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, Israel's one of the few places where Trump is very popular, and he was popular even before the hostage thing. But because of the ceasefire and the hostage deal, the cause of the hostages became a very big rallying cry for the anti-Netanyahu camp, because Netanyahu was seen as prioritizing fighting Hamas over releasing the hostages, instead of cutting a deal with Hamas and getting the hostages. So the hostage cause became a very central thing. Not only, this is very broad strokes, but it became a central cause, especially for the anti-Netanyahu camp.
Yeah.
And when Trump got the deal and the hostages came home, or those who remained alive came home, it was he's now very popular across the board. It does look like he's endorsing Netanyahu, I got to be
Yeah, yeah.
honest, including saying how Netanyahu should be pardoned
Yeah, he said
in his
he has to be
trials very
pardoned.
explicitly.
Yeah, that's great.
So yeah.
One of the things that I was expecting when the war is done and over, or, in a fragile peace that we are in right now, is things going to happen in Israel in terms of like, some accountability, some reports, the leak video that came out. I'm expecting more of that. I think there's more. We're gonna find more of the war crimes that were committed, or some stories about what actually happened October 7th in terms of like failure in intelligence or stuff like that. Like we don't know, but I feel like there's a lot of the leak video that came out, which is obviously horrible. You know. I feel like more is gonna come from that stuff. What's your thoughts on that? And what's your thoughts on the leak video itself?
So there'll be two. So these are two separate issues. The first on October 7th and the failures there, quite a bit is coming out, and that's something where the Israeli society itself, there's a big push to bring it forward. Of course, Netanyahu would prefer less be discussed, but there's an enormous and kind of obsessive, understandably so, interest in exactly what happened, both in the lead up, but also on the day itself. So the Israeli press is dealing with that and has been dealing with that every single day since October 7th. And especially if Netanyahu is no longer in power, then there will be a national commission of inquiry, which is sort of the formal way Israelis usually deal with these things. And a lot more will come out. About, any alleged war crimes and things like that, I'm sure more will come out. And these were two horrific long years, and I'm sure more will come out. But that's one where it's a very different dynamic, because the
Yeah,
Israeli society is not terribly interested in hearing about it, and has also seen a very, very different image than people abroad did of the war itself. When
yeah,
Israelis reported to themselves about the war, they, for example, dealt with the horrors of October 7th every day since then, whereas the world had moved on and was viewing things in Gaza that Israelis didn't always see, often
yeah,
did not. So
It's
Now, the
kind of like
leaked
when Abu
video,
Ghraib happened in Iraq.
Americans were like,
Yeah,
"What? What are you talking about?"
it
Yeah,
was like, yeah,
Americans had no idea, and
yeah,
they often didn't see that.
yeah,
And honestly, if you tell many Americans how many people died in Afghanistan or in Iraq, they'd be shocked because it
yeah.
wasn't something America dealt with. And that's very true in Israel, as opposed to
But I
everyone
was I
else in
was
the world.
interested more with the dynamic within the Israeli society because now this, the way when you have like leaked video versus, investigation, it's a different thing. Like when they demand what happens in October 7th to know exactly how the
Yeah.
failure of intelligence or the response, the quick response, all that. That's one thing when it's investigation and results come in. But when it start leaking, it's
But the,
almost
but the leak here is a weird one because it
yeah.
was leaked by the prosecutor. So
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
prosecution
Can you
had the
tell the
tape.
story to the people who don't know?
Sure. So this was a horrific case that was videotaped of abuse of a prisoner, perhaps we don't know, but perhaps a Nukhba member, so a Hamas operative, maybe that was involved in October 7th, who nonetheless, of course, has human rights. And so horrific abuse by Israeli guards in a sort of makeshift prison, but a sort of a camp that was set up as a temporary prison. And they were being investigated to be put on trial. They were soldiers. They were in reserve. Actually, I'm not sure if they were reservists, but they were in. I think they were not reservists. And the real whistleblowers, those who complained, were reservists who had seen this. And reservists are often older and smarter or wiser, not smarter, but wiser. And they complained about this. So the military investigation, the military sort of judicial system clamped down on it and arrested them and were prosecuting them. There was an enormous kind of from the right wing in Israel there, including ministers, protesting this arrest and saying you're aiding the enemy. These are our people in the times of war. Our hostages are still being tortured right now in the tunnels, and you're dealing with our soldiers. You're crazy. And so you had even ministers infiltrating into a military camp to protest, so breaking the law, obviously. With this backlash, the military prosecutor apparently, allegedly, ordered to leak this video to the press so that the public would see that the military prosecution, was right in doing this. So it's a now she then lied about it, apparently, allegedly, lied about it to her commanders, who are the chiefs of staff, and of course, it's also illegal to do so. So she's in very, very deep waters, and it's become a huge issue in Israel. It's also taken a huge proportion unrelated to the crime itself that was on tape, which is horrific, but also in the sense that Netanyahu, before the war, since January 2023, has been leading a real coup against or revolution of the whole democratic nature of Israel, the balance between the judiciary and the executive and the parliament, and in a way that would dramatically diminish the oversight of the judiciary over the executive and give almost unlimited power to an executive, which is him at the moment. And this issue of the Advocate General has been sort of seized upon by the Netanyahu camp as an example of the deep state. That's very explicitly, they use the phrase deep state, the judiciary, unelected deep state that is against the people, is against its elected leader, and all that kind of stuff. So it's become a very politicized issue. It's also a very convoluted one. Allegedly, what she's accused of is obviously a crime. But of course, the crime at the source of all this is sort of being forgotten, and it's a horrific one. And 2-year war, it's hard to believe it was the only case, right?
Yeah.
So that's often being forgotten in all of this.
Yeah, a lot of people also don't know here that there was I don't want to say division in Israel before the war, but there was a lot of,
Huge.
political. Yeah.
Huge chasm, yeah.
Yeah.
And
So,
hundreds of thousands of people in the street over it. This judicial reform, they called it, really a giant revolution. Hundreds of thousands of people in the street demonstrating against the Netanyahu attempt. And
yeah.
it's odd. Imagine hundreds of thousands of people, which would be millions in the American equivalent, many millions, demonstrating over technical laws of how you how you appoint judges, these kinds of things that seem mundane, but are central to the way Israeli democracy works and whether there are any checks on the executive. And that's full steam ahead now again. I mean, the coalition, the Netanyahu coalition, is pushing that again.
Yeah. I have one last question, but let's Lou have any final thoughts, Lou, or question?
No, I really appreciate Natan and you, Hatem. Yeah,
A little
I
bit.
have a complaint. But I have
Yes.
a complaint, which is that I come here and I want to get some good comedy, and we have a real, experts here, like an actual practitioner, and every time we talk about the most,
I know.
depressing stuff, and it's unfair.
Yeah, yeah, it's it's very interesting about, and let's end with that. The comedy world is like it seems like whenever there's tragedies in the world, comedy is always the outlet. Like I think the comedy, business is booming now because it just everybody need you know, um, an outlet. And I remember I was working at the Comedy Store at the time when 9/11 happened, and there's like, what are we gonna do? Are we gonna open? Are we gonna, what are we gonna do? And Manny, Noam's dad, is like, let's open and just. We're not gonna say comedy, not gonna say anything. We're just gonna open the door and see. And it was packed, and most of the people came were either, survivors, just want to talk about anything. They don't want to watch the news anymore. And the comedians weren't even doing comedy. They would just go on the stage and talking. So I feel like, conversations, when the world like is so crazy, there's always comedy, coming and saving. So yeah, no, I hear you complain. But business wise, it's working very well. But yeah, next time you come in New York, we'll take you to a few shows
Yeah,
whenever
I'd
you,
love
you
to. That'd be
you
great.
are here. Well, Natan, it's always great to have you. Always put it in a perspective. I hope the whole world is like have same kind of views that you have in terms of like understanding all sides and break it down the way you do. And I think there will be a better place when people like you are involved.
Likewise. And Lou, great
When
to spend
well,
time
if
with you
people want,
too.
oh, thank you. If people want to follow you and find you and email you or tweet you, whatever, where they can find you.
Natan Sachs, NATAN SACHS at most platforms, or simply at the Middle East Institute website. That's probably the easiest way.
Sounds great. Can't wait to get you again. Lou, where people can find you.
TheLouPerez.com and also on Substack at Lou Perez.
Great.
And his book, That Joke Is Not Funny Anymore, is actually very, very good. And it's coming, it's going to be a show soon, either he likes it or not. It's
We're,
happening.
we're going to talk
Fantastic.
about that tonight. I get
All
to
right.
meet up
Thank
with
you
him
very
tonight.
much. Live
Thank
from
you both.
America
Good
podcast.